Today, I just wanted to discuss a little bit about, not a little, a lot about local politics here in the United States. And I wanted to emphasize a couple of recent developments that occurred nationwide, primarily elections that occurred yesterday. These elections were primary elections. That means they were meant to choose the nominees associated with their respective parties. There were quite a number of primary elections nationwide, but I'm only going to really focus on three main elections that I think are more significant because they bear a lot more weight when it comes to their effect on the nationwide midterms, specifically the Senate, because I think that's the more competitive side of the U.S. election or U.S. midterms, right? What you're looking at the screen right now is the 538 forecast. For those of you who know 538, there's no explanation, but those of you who don't, 538 is a subsidiary of ABC News and by extension, Disney and so on and so forth, if you want to go up the corporate ladder. They developed the software in which they pretty much takes into account local forecast, election insider opinions, and polls. And the algorithm then, based on that information, determines sort of like not only the balance of power, but also like the probability of one candidate winning in an election versus another. So specifically here, they give you kind of like the probability of which party is slated to win the control of a specific side of the government based on statistics. So, for example, here you have a 58% probability for Democrats to win the Senate. The House is 20%, and the governor elections is based on the number of governorships. So since it's not as consequential as the House and the Senate, they don't give like a probability estimate on the whole wide number of governorship, but rather they do give probability on the individual governorships. That's not to say that the governor elections aren't important, right? Because they control it's the executive of the legislature, and that eventually determines kind of like the how the election protocols will go in the future, essentially. The big pieces that I wanted to discuss, though, aside from the forecast and its sort of like determining factor on how the election will go, is the big news that happened yesterday, right? The most notable news that occurred yesterday was quite possibly the Kansas election results, specifically the one that is associated with the amendment to the Constitution of Kansas, right? They made a ballot initiative in which they basically wanted voters to decide whether or not they wanted to keep abortion right protections in the state. And how is that possible? Well, there's a provision in the Constitution of Kansas in which that allows abortion to happen, right? I don't have the exact legal language for that, but it essentially allows abortion to occur in the state to a certain degree, right? The state legislature can determine to what degree that is, but it essentially asked voters whether they wanted to remove that measure or not, and the majority of voters decided that that wasn't going to happen. So why is that consequential, given that the state is not only heavily Republican, but also heavily on the more conservative side? Well, that's precisely it, right? You have usually abortion, the removal of abortion rights is more closely associated with more of a conservative view of that side of the spectrum, right? And in a state so conservative as Kansas, or has the assumption that it's conservative, a more than a big majority of the population or the voting population decided to vote against this measure, which it's notable considering that even in a conservative state, you still have this big animosity against abortion removal, right? They don't go to that extreme, or at least voters don't go to that extreme, which serves as kind of like a bellwether as to how the country feels. That even in the most conservative state, you still have more of a centrist perspective on this issue, right? It could give an indication as to like how out of step a lot of the anti-abortion policies are with the overall voting population, right? And to a certain extent, it could help us understand, or it could help us gauge how that sentiment will translate to votes in the midterms, right? That doesn't necessarily mean just because you are a pro-abortion voter doesn't mean that you're going to vote Democrat or Republican, right? Doesn't mean that you are automatically going to vote for the Democrats, right? There are a number of issues that motivate them, but this could, in certain states, certainly like move the needle to predominant parties in this two-party system, unfortunately. In this case is the state of Arizona. You have Democratic incumbent being Mark Kelly. And the election that occurred was a Republican primary in which Blake Masters, which had the backing of Donald Trump in this case, won in the Senate. Now, he's also very much against abortion rights, so that follows the same streamline. But he's also very much like an election denier, so that might or might not play well in the state of Arizona, given the high amount of support for Trump-backed or Trump-endorsed candidates in the state. So this is another race to watch for. That's why these bits of news are so significant. And the reason I mentioned all those races is because certainly forecasters think that that is the case, right? Just 30 minutes ago, this went from 57% to 58% in favor of the Democrats on the Senate side, in a year in which Republicans are supposed to be more dominant and whatnot. That's only if you follow the more recent 30 years of political history in the United States, in which like the party in power is the one that loses in the midterms. That's only like a very recent phenomenon, and by recent I mean 30 to 40 years, right? It's a bit of good news if you're a Democrat or if you are more inclined to that side, but not so much on the House side. Although on the House side, you see like just recently they had a 17% chance of victory, Democratic side, but now they have a 20% chance. So it is slightly shifting. So the momentum seems to be more towards the Democratic side. You see that also in the governor elections with Gretchen Whitmer. You see that slightly in Arizona. And you can go down the list. You see kind of like a shift in the spectrum, essentially. So anyway, I just wanted to give you guys sort of like a summary of the biggest political news, like local political news that are essentially affecting the midterm elections in the United States. And in the future, I'll see if I can talk about the senatorial election forecast and kind of dig into a little bit more detail if you guys are interested. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.